Hey guys, today I'm going to be going over the good, bad, and ugly of Module 4, Week 1 of Praxis. I'll be covering all the content, some more in depth than others. So I'm going to start out with giving it 5 minutes in review. It's an article by Jason Fried, pretty short, and he was speaking at a business conference where he was complimented by Richard Saul Werman. And after his compliment, Jason's immediate response was to push back and start challenging Richard's own ideas from his own speech that he gave. And Richard replied, he just said, man, give it 5 minutes. And that kind of took Jason by surprise. And he elaborated on that in his piece where he said, he really didn't think before speaking, and that 5 minutes was representative of that. And ideas are fragile and they start powerless, and giving them 5 minutes allows the time to grow. Which leads into my thoughts, which is starting with the good, giving ideas time to grow, to think. Ideas are fragile. They need protection. If everyone did this, fewer ideas would be killed. But leading me to the bad, ideas need more than 5 minutes, in my opinion. Giving everything 5 minutes keeps ideas alive. I think everyone should do that. But it isn't enough time to fully develop an idea. I believe ideas should be visited from different perspectives more than once just to get the full potential out of the idea. And even bad ideas need more than 5 minutes, because through workshopping and discussing the ideas, that's how you really develop them, and you get new ideas that may be better or may be great. And I think the point he was making is ideas shouldn't be dismissed right away. And overall, I agree with that point, but it's kind of portrayed as 5 minutes is enough time to have an opinion, which I don't agree that's enough time for a full opinion, which leads us to the ugly, which is how long do ideas really need? There's no real answer to that, and I think the next piece of content kind of answers that. What they go over in this piece of content can kind of apply to ideas too. It's a short article. It starts with being informed instead of just opinionated. Most of us hold opinions without doing the required work. That work being that you have to be able to argue against your opinion better than anybody else. Once you can argue against yourself better than anybody else, then you can hold your opinion. And he covers the key points in achieving that in the piece as well. So moving on to my thoughts from that. The good is arguing against your opinions. Everyone should do this. It exposes you to different perspectives. It allows you to see through biases and see positives from the other side that you may have previously dismissed. The bad on this is it's impractical. Nobody can be an expert on everything, and everybody has somewhat of an opinion on everything. While this is the most correct way to develop an opinion, not everyone can do it effectively because they don't have the time to research every opinion that they have fully. So sometimes they have to go to other places, which kind of leads into ugly, which is that the quest for knowledge is never ending. We will never know everything. We can get closer to knowing everything as we break down and argue our opinions, but the work never ends as far as developing opinions goes. That work is always there, which leads into the next piece, which is you have no idea how wrong you are. It's about a 30-minute video of a college professor giving a lecture. And in that lecture, he claims humans make more mistakes than any other species do, and they do it more prevalently. And he uses a lot of evidence and historical examples of intelligent people being wrong. He says the people of the future will look on us as, even though we think we're getting it right now, when they look back on us, it's going to be all wrong, as we look back on history now and we see everyone doing everything all wrong. And he also goes on to elaborate that we will never, ever be right. We're just become less wrong. And my thoughts on that, starting with the good, are, yeah, humans get a lot wrong. And he did support that with abundance of evidence. And I do agree with him. He uses historical examples and he uses scientific studies that indicate humans overestimate their abilities, which I thought was extremely interesting. But the bad about this talk was that I feel like he kind of ignored context through the talk. Right and wrong were never really defined clearly, and the differences between right and wrong could have been discussed more, because they weren't really touched on until near the end of the video. And He claims that the listener's beliefs are likely wrong, but he never really goes into what makes them wrong. What would right beliefs look like? And I feel like he could have explained more and defended his argument less, if that makes sense. He didn't really go into depth about what his argument was. He more just took his stance and argued for it, explained his stance less than he should have. And he ends it with what I think is the ugly part of this, which is we can't get it right, but we can get it less wrong. Knowing we will never be right can be scary, and do we know what right even is? And the subjectivity of right versus wrong blurs the lines between them. And I think that makes it difficult to see which direction we are going in, right or wrong. And that's kind of a really interesting thing that was kind of touched upon in this lecture is we will never be right, but we can get it less wrong. And I think that's a scary thought. And, moving on to the next piece is why philosophers make formidable entrepreneurs. So many entrepreneurs don't have technical backgrounds, and the author of this piece acknowledged that. And as he looked around, he noticed a disproportionate number of them had majored in philosophy. So he starts by defining traits of philosophers, and as he goes down, he goes into how they would apply to business, and that's how philosophers seek to structure the world. They're deeply analytical, find deeper truths, like to argue, and they aren't afraid to risk. I generally agree with all these, but to elaborate more, what I thought was good about this piece is that, leaders need to be philosophical. It allows them to think critically. Philosophy helps with self-guidance, which in turn helps guide their company, which is why philosophical entrepreneurs are so successful, in my opinion. But what I think is bad about this piece is entrepreneurship requires more than philosophy. Entrepreneurs shouldn't be afraid to get their hands dirty, and they should be willing to learn the technical skills needed to help out their company if willing to. And he also, going into ugly, kind of makes assumptions about philosophers with the points he makes. They're not crazy assumptions, but they're not evidence supported, and that's kind of the whole leg that his article is standing on. So that's just my opinion on that. And moving on to the next piece, I like this one a lot too. It's Philosophers on Philosophy. So it's the Philosophy Bites podcast, where he asked multiple philosophers for their definition of philosophy, and none of the answers were the same. No two answers were the same. But some of the common themes in there were critical thinking, sense making, and dealing with presuppositions, which was pretty interesting. Yeah, so what I thought was good was the wide range of answers, and it was really interesting how different a lot of them were, because no two were the same. And bad. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it was my only negative takeaway, because it was hard to find a negative takeaway, was the format of this, because it was just so many different answers, and they were all so insightful, and then they're all just thrown together back to back. So I actually listened to this piece a few times, because it's not that long, which was pretty convenient, but it did make it hard to kind of consume all the content and comprehend it all. So the format of it makes you kind of have to go back and re-listen to a lot of them. And there was writing for them, so it wasn't too difficult, so it's not too bad. And the ugly part of this section, I thought, was that there's no right answer. What is philosophy is one of the most philosophical questions there is. My personal definition of philosophy is making sense of questions with no absolute answer. And how we make sense of these questions kind of makes up our differences in characters as people, because these are questions with no set answer. So how we interpret it and how we think these things is what makes us different as people. And moving on to the next piece, why hypothetical thinking matters. In review, he says hypotheticals aren't useless, which many people think they are. I don't think they are, but it's a common opinion to have. And he elaborates that hypotheticals serve two critical functions: devising practical contingency plans and achieving intellectual clarity, specifically in complex environments. So my thoughts in this piece were the good is that he defines two useful functions, and using these functions and hypotheticals, we can create these isolated situations that help us expose our biases, and those help us self-learn and self-improve from that. But moving on to the bad of this piece is that hypotheticals can often neglect reality, and ignoring what would realistically happen can paint a false image if you're not careful, and hypotheticals can be taken too seriously to the point where they start affecting your life in a negative way. So it's just something to be careful about. And then at least the ugly, which is the line between a useful and useless hypothetical, it's pretty thin. It's easy to use useless hypotheticals and kind of interpret them as useful. But useful hypotheticals are more difficult to create, and taking value from your responses to the hypotheticals is just as important as a skill, and that can be neglected, and you can end up getting no results from hypotheticals. So these are my thoughts from the first week of the philosophy module. Thanks for watching.